Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Doormat Mom No More podcast. I'm Doormat Mom, and today we are talking to Dr. Kerry McAvoy, and she is, among other things, an expert on narcissism. And since we talk about estrangement on my podcast primarily, I figured I would have her on because there is a correlation between children who go estranged and narcissism that we're seeing more and more. So I wanted to get an expert on to talk about what really is narcissism, how prevalent is it, and ask specific questions about what it looks like and how our children are developing narcissism under our noses. So I'm going to share one video that I thought was a great beginning to this whole podcast conversation. It sets a stage that is really talked about, but it's something that we really have to think about in relation to these current generations. So hang on, I'm going to go over to Instagram and play this video for you. Here we go.
There's a surprising amount of rage over the idea that you may not have control over the way your child turns out as an adult. The idea that a child is not a blank slate but comes into the world with a set of personality traits seems to be extremely uncomfortable, which makes me want to understand why. And I also want to talk about what this does to parents who are struggling right now with an adult child who is abusive. So if you stick around to the end, I'm going to talk about what happens when we hold on to these cultural myths. And before you come for me in the comments, none of my children have gone no contact with me at this moment. And I have raised 3 autistic sons who are doing very well. I am not coming at this from a personal angle, but rather with great compassion for those who are struggling. Accepting the idea that you can do all the right things and still have a troubled child disrupts the narrative that parents hold all the power and have complete control over the way kids turn out. It's uncomfortable, maybe even disturbing to know that you can do all the right things as a parent, but that doesn't protect you from parental estrangement. There is a lot of research that supports this that goes all the way back and that has been designed well and replicated. And although we don't like to hear that, that doesn't negate its accuracy. Each generation comes into the world with a different set of experiences and expectations, and the millennial and Gen Zs are very different from the boomers and Gen Xs, and they're looking for emotional resonance. If you find the message that children are not a blank slate uncomfortable, I want to urge you to sit with that and take a long look at why that bothers you, what inside of you gets threatened. Because here's what it does when we blame and shame parents for adult children's behavior. We're silencing them. We're asking them to internalize blame that doesn't belong to them. We're asking them to live in chronic grief and loss. And we want them to walk on eggshells, not only with that difficult adult child, but also with us. And we leave them feeling tremendously alone and very misunderstood. No 2 children born to the same family are ever the same. We know that. Let's stop assigning blame and shame for the way kids turn out. Sometimes there is abusive parents, but also sometimes they're abusive children.
So that blank slate theory, where children are coming to the world with as blank slates, I mentioned that in my book, Doormat Mom No More, which you can get on Amazon. And I referenced it because she's not the only one that is saying that. Plenty of scientists have said that children come into the world, I believe, with 435 existing characteristics. And that never gets factored into this estrangement situation, this epidemic that we're experiencing in the United States and really in many other first world countries around the world are experiencing it too. So that's something that I really thought was a great way to begin this conversation with Dr. Kerry, because that's real. And like I said, that's not being addressed. So I'm going to bring her on and we're going to say hello and we're going to talk a little bit more. Hello.
Hi.
I loved that video. I loved so many of your videos, but I thought that was a great way to start because you do point that out, and it's rarely ever discussed, and it's not even factored into the estrangement epidemic, especially from, the many adult children's side that are going astray. So maybe explain a little bit more about that and the impact of that on, the abuse situation, estrangement, narcissism, all of the above. And please share, before you do, share a little bit more about your background so that we understand what brings you to this situation and what's your academic, what's the background into your academics.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me on. First of all, I'm a clinical psychologist who was practicing for a private practice for a long period of time. And then in 2014, my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed away in 2015. And I ended up widowed after a very long marriage, raising 3 sons. We had a really good family, but it just shattered with his cancer, and being widowed was just a traumatic, very difficult period. And interestingly enough, and that was the period in which at least one of my kids, and probably the other one went low contact, but one of my kids went no contact with me right after that big trauma. And it kind of makes sense because we were all in shell shock at what happened, because from diagnosis to death, it was only 5.5 months. And it was a brutal period of time. But I got out of that and really wanted the life that I'd had back. And I realized I couldn't practice as a psychologist. I was grieving so intensely that I wasn't in shape to sit with clients. So I closed my practice. My last child left home for college. So I lost everything, lost the retirement, lost my partner, lost the father of the kids. And then I was no longer a mom, active mom. And then I closed my practice. So I started dating and ended up getting married 2 years later to somebody who was sort of like, if you pick everything that was bad about my whole life, I found it in one person, ended up in this very traumatic relationship that was extremely dangerous, actually, not just toxic, but dangerous. And ended up in this very narcissistic relationship with somebody now that I'm pretty for sure who was a psychopath, and was in that relationship for 2 years. And it was shocking. The experience was so startling, being married to the narcissist and discovering it as who's also a psychopath, that as a clinical psychologist, how could I have missed the signs that this was a dangerous, or at least not a functional person? So I got out of the relationship. And at that point, just much like you have been trying to make sense of what's happened to you by writing a book, I wrote Love You More, which is the tale of what happened to me, and did a massive deep dive into cluster B personality disorders. And now I had already had a decent education. I went to a rare graduate program in clinical psychology that had a lot of personality disorder focused graduate classes. So I understood sort of the general issues, general makeup, although, of course, research is always moving forward. So that was fortunate for me. But what there has not been a focus on, and I think you're seeing this problem across the board. So it's not just in romantic relationships, it's at all levels. We've not been talking about what happens to individuals and families who are in a relationship with a narcissistic or at least a dysfunctional, emotionally immature person. That it's not just that this person has disturbances and deficiencies that make them struggle to live, work, and love well, but they also have an incredible impact, negative impact on the family as well, and on those in the closest. That it ends up being a very psychologically shattering experience, I guess is really the best word. It causes you to doubt yourself, end up feeling like you're the problem. It makes you feel terribly confused about what's happening. And of course, those of us who are very conscientious and want a really strong relationship with others, it makes us work harder, makes us take the blame. And of course, they also say that it's our fault. So we feel that it's our fault, which it becomes this extremely negative cycle. So that's sort of the long story of how I got here, is that I got terribly hurt, wanted to make sense of it. And as a psychologist was shocked that it happened to me, which then also gave me a whole lot of insight of that this can happen to anyone. There's nothing. People like to say it could never happen to them. Well, I hate to tell them, no, that's not true. It can happen to you, because these types of relationships are often that predatory or that sophisticated.
I have to interject something here. So I didn't realize that part of your story. You and I share a very parallel history with regard. I lost my husband when I was 35, and I had 4 little kids that I was raising. Your kids were older. My oldest at that point was 9. So then going from that period to through that transition to then meeting the next person, we share similar as well. And it's interesting that that I was attracted to your work because it's coming from an angle that I identify with very well on a couple of different planes. Because even what you're describing and with regards to that next person, we're seeing some of those similar traits in adult children, and we're not identifying it because either we're not aware of what it looks like, so we can't make heads or tails of it, or within our own children, you wouldn't expect, like someone who you think loves you, you wouldn't expect that this could be happening, that this is actually happening. You wouldn't expect it from them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So any type of behavior that could be hurtful to you and intentionally hurtful in an essence, you wouldn't expect it. So and so you just miss it. You miss it. And they know, and I think in many ways with regards to love interests or even in certain cases, these adult kids, they know you so well that they can read the script in order to use that to work whatever their magic is, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of historically as well as culturally, we're blind in a lot of different ways, and it's interesting why we blind ourselves to these dynamics. I mean, you go back to where it's sort of the rise of psychoanalysis with Freud. He quickly blamed the mother and said even at that point the schizophrenia was due to child rearing, and the primary relationship, which of course was the mother, was the sort of the cause of every child's difficulty. She was the blame for that. They didn't, and despite the fact that we know kids are not born the same, that's what I said in that Instagram video that you played, was we can see that if you have how many children you have, no two are ever going to be alike. They're going to all have sort of different sets of strengths and weaknesses. Right. But the other thing we ignore is that we recognize as predatory people in adulthood. We can talk about that quite comfortably, and we're willing to sort of assign blame to individuals who are acting out, but we don't ask how did they become that? Or if we do, we then turn around and blame mom again. Well, they had a traumatic background. That's why they're the way that they are. So we say that kids are born sort of innocent, this blank slate, which comes out of behaviorism in the 1970s, which is silly because anybody has more than one kid knows that's not true. And then, but if anything goes wrong, it's mom's fault. And then when we see these predatory people, it's still mom's fault. So it's wild how we excuse, we over idealize children and say they don't have any accountability, or there's nothing to play. There's no genetics to play. But we also then, when somebody's predatory, we don't hold them accountable. We just look at their background and says, well, it must be their family. It must be the parenting.
Right. Well, that's the nature versus nurture situation that at one of your videos was talking about, where people can actually identify as early as 7 years.
Yes. Yeah, that came to that was according to Dr. Lester, Gregory Lester. He doesn't, you can't get him to speak. He actually only educates other clinicians for continuing education, but he has a practice where he specializes with cluster B personality disorders. And he was also instrumentally part of the chair or the committee that created the cluster B changes in the DSM-5. He was very much involved in that. So he was saying these traits are observable as young as 7. You can see that there's something different. That somehow these kids are struggling with things like empathy. They're really having a hard time with impulse control. They tend to be excessively egocentric. Now, all kids have periods of egocentricity as part of developmental stages, but there's something kind of uniquely different about these kids that parents can spot to. And it's interesting, back in my practice, when I was seeing families and individuals, I'd have moms come in just haggard, exhausted, weepy, talking about difficult children. They would try everything to manage this one kid out of the group that was really just taking them for a ride. And, we would do a lot of like pretty sophisticated strategies to try to help rein this in, but it was usually quite challenging. I mean, yeah, some of that worked, but see, here's the thing. If they're a blank slate, you should be able to control behavior. If you have a perfectly designed scientific, setting, you should be able to get, because here's another piece we're not talking about. And I think this is wild. I also worked at a child psychiatric facility for 6 months. Now, these are the kids who are so ill, they can't be in not only a residential program, but they need to be in the highest level of care, the highest level of structure, because things are so at risk. It means there's danger at some level. And even as staff, here we are medicating them. We have them completely 100% supervised. I mean, the ratio to these kids are like maybe 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 1. I mean, it's really like high level care. And we're not managing the behavior. We often have to use what's called a security room to put them into a quiet time for protection of us and other people. So if it was a blank slate, you'd think you add corrective measures, the corrective measures would work, and then you'd have this calm, docile kid. But it doesn't work quite like that.
No, it doesn't. And, it makes me think with regards to how do these relationships with their parents moving forward develop into a situation where abuse and estrangement does happen from the child to the parent. And you sort of, you section that off into, 4 different ways. And I'll give you a cue as to what I know. You said the abusive parent, the tough to raise, the extenuating circumstances, which did resonate with me, and then the abusive married in. So explain those, because I'm dealing with in my group that I have and on many of my videos responses, and those are honestly you put it together in 4 points. But what I'm hearing all the time is, my son married this woman, or, I was raising them when I had tremendous duress, or, all those things. And of course, then we get the kids that are saying they're abused, but they're really diminishing, the actual abused children, because these kids believe they were abused. Maybe, I mean, they're putting everything in that catch-all, but it's not really, abuse. And you never want to say that, because then they're like, well, what do you mean it's not everything? If I say it, everything is abuse, it's abuse. That's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Have you come across Dr. Lindsay Gibson's work with the adult children of emotionally immature parents?
I have come across it. I have not read any of it yet.
Yeah, it's really good work. I also got to do some continuing education with her as well. So there is that group. There is a group and actually that group usually ends up not abusive. The children of those parents usually end up pretty docile, submissive, and they also end up in usually an abusive relationship as an adult, because they're so easygoing and they've learned to manage the emotion of the other person in the relationship. They've been managing their mother or father's emotions, so they've learned to sort of submerge themselves for the sake of safety in that relationship. So yes, there are some kids who come up and would say, I usually don't talk about this, but I know my mother will not be listening to this because she's not aware that I'm doing this interview. My family was not healthy. My parents were pretty emotionally immature individuals. My mom is narcissistic, and she is a huge drain. And it is a definitely one-sided relationship. She definitely objectifies me and uses me extensively. I have considered going no contact with her, but I just can't bear to do that because she's 85. And, at this point, I know things are not going to change, but because when we do, this is the problem with no contact. And even as a psychologist, working with the survivor community, I do urge no contact in a pathological love relationship. To break the trauma bond, you have to give yourself space and time to regulate a very traumatized nervous system. You have to get distance, break the addiction to this individual, figure out who you are, and start to reclaim those parts of yourself. And it is very difficult to do when you're still maintaining contact with that individual, because they're so persuasive. In fact, I got to hear Sandra L. Brown. I did an interview with her. She wrote the book, Women Who Love Psychopaths. She said they open their mouths and you are back mesmerized. So you need the distance to just break that incredible connection.
Right.
But think of it this way. In psychology, anything that's in the extreme, if people who can't bear to be apart or people who can't bear to be anywhere near each other are both two ends of a dysfunctional continuum.
Right.
Healthiness is learning how to maintain connection in difficulty.
Right.
That's what we ideally want to see people be able to do. So
Right.
that's what I've done with my mom. I'm low contact. I try not to jump when she wants me to necessarily, but I also am considerate. And I realize she's a human being with needs of her own. You know, she struggles to see my needs, and I recognize that. I'm careful to protect my needs around her, but I'm also try to be sensitive. So that's the kind of relationship I've maintained with her. But I have wondered, I mean, would it be, so I can see how sometimes, I mean, I don't know if you saw that I interviewed I'm trying to think of Alex Anderson, who directed, and I think he may have written the movie Fog. And it was about a mother-daughter relationship where the daughter says, out for my own safety, I need to go no contact. And he did a really good job showing how that mother alienated and pushed the child really out, the adult child out. Right. But you also can see the pain. I mean, this girl is grieving that loss. So there is that group. I know I took a really long time saying that, but but the other group at the other opposite end is that there are kids who come into the world who are just very difficult, who have a different mindset. I think one of the things we don't appreciate, and this was discussed by Dr. David Schnarf, is the idea of mind mapping. Have you heard of that before? Mind mapping?
Yep.
Yeah. Mind mapping is the ability to anticipate. In fact, AI is now able to do a lot of mind mapping. It's the ability to get into your head and anticipate what you're thinking and feeling. So how you know children can mind map is when they can tell a lie, because they know what you want to hear. And then they know that, so they tell you that, because in order to hide what they really did, because they don't want to deal with that. That's evidence that somebody can mind map. So we do have children who are born with not a collaborative mindset, but more of a competitive mindset. That's the best way that I know how to synthesize all those characteristics, the deficiencies. You know, why is their brain, by the way, their brain looks different. A narcissistic brain, Nature has a really wonderful article where it actually shows it lit up. I think it's like maybe with a PET, and you can see the areas that are just different. They're just, it's processing glucose in a very different way. So the areas that might be active for you and I are not active for them. And the areas that would not be low active for us, they're very active for them. So how did their brain get to be different? Well, that's a big issue of interest. You know, I think it's complicated. I think there's a lot of variables that happen that create this person who ends up having a different neurological set than you and I do. But that difference results in a competitive worldview in which they are very aware of injustice, or not like real injustices, but to the degree that things aren't fair. They want this, but even the idea of fair isn't fair. They don't really want fairness. They believe they're extra special and they're entitled. And to them, anything that doesn't go to them is not fair. And they just see themselves as different and special. And as a result of that, they're extraordinarily egocentric and very selfish, very, very controlling people. And so how did they get to be that way? Well, we're not quite for sure. There's probably a play of it, genetics, maybe early, some environmental factors that we quite don't understand how they interplay, maybe epigenetics, but for some reason, for some biosocial reason, they're different. So there's that group that they're just difficult children who then are very difficult to raise. And they're and because of this competitive mindset, they take the victim position. You did this. I didn't get what I wanted. You did this to me. One of my kids are autistic. I know I said that in the video. And one of them had low empathy. And he would do things, for example, I would say, stay belted in the seat, in the car or child seat. And he wouldn't. And then if I accidentally hit the brakes on purpose hard and threw him, he'd say, you did that to me. No, you weren't in your seat. That's why that happened. No, you weren't in your seat. But that's an example of how they would do that. They would say, no matter what they did or what their responsibility or accountability to the situation is, they would blame you. It's your fault. You made it happen. So those are very, very difficult kids. And those kids go no contact too, because, you know, everything that's not right about the life then is your fault, or you're not showing up quite the right way, or they want so much of you that you can't even, I mean, I've heard stories of where kids who expect the parent practically to move in when they have the new baby and be the full-time care provider, so this adult child can have the life that they want without, you know what I'm talking about. So
that's a big topic on TikTok.
No
I
doubt.
mean, that is wild. That's interesting that you're talking about that twisting of the scenario to the benefit of that child, because we're going to talk a little bit later about semantic abuse, but that's sort of similar to the same thing, where you're twisting things to the benefit of the narrative that you want. So let's talk about the third one, which is the extenuating circumstances.
Those are the ones, like maybe there's an illness, like in my case, we both were widowed. And for me, that resulted in me having one of my kids go no contact. It was my youngest. When his dad got sick, he was a senior in high school. I basically was absent. Truthfully, I couldn't be in two places at the same time. I wasn't able to be home and be at the hospital because my late husband's illness was so severe. He ended up having major surgery with massive recovery, and then he went into hospice, and then the pain was so severe that I was really his nurse in a lot of ways, managing this terribly intense, awful situation as he declined very rapidly. And he also then had a rapid onset. I didn't know this could happen, but maybe you don't know that either, but some people develop a form of dementia from their autoimmune system attacking the nervous system, looking for cancer. It thinks there's something wrong, and it attacks the nervous system, believing that that's what the problem is. So he ended up having, that's called paraneoplastic syndrome, and he was losing his mind. So he was actively psychotic and had dementia. You went through something similar. It's devastating. It's devastating experience. It's frightening.
I'm so surprised you're even saying this. I've never actually even spoken to anyone about that side of it.
Yeah, it's devastating. Yeah, so I end up having to manage between him and the world, because he's quietly going crazy, and he's also can't think. He's an engineer who can't do basic math anymore. Near the end of his life, he couldn't even speak. He couldn't write. It was awful.
That's the hardest thing, is when you look back. I remember saying to myself, he is still so aware that he can realize he's losing his mind.
Oh,
and that's what brought me, if there was any moment that really just brought me to tears during that period of time, when it was that he knew enough to understand that he was losing his mind.
Oh yeah, he did too. He knew that too. He lost the sense of time. That was the bizarrest one, where he literally couldn't tell the difference between a minute and hours or a day. He didn't know what day it was, but he couldn't feel time move anymore, which is very disrupting, because he would make us leave because he thought that we needed to be somewhere else, and it was like way later in that day, but to him it was like now. And he did know. I mean, he was aware he couldn't write. He was aware he couldn't speak, or he's losing his ability to speak. He forgot even he was dying. Oh, that was a brutal one. Oh man, anyway, it was so here we are, and the youngest is home, while all this is happening and watching this happen, and it was brutal. So when it was over, we were just shell shocked. I mean, completely. I mean, I was devastated. They're devastated. My kids were ages 17 to 24. So college, ending high school, going to here. In fact, he died 2 days after my youngest walked across the height. So here I am at the high school auditorium trying to show up, and they're making they made special arrangements for me, special seat, everything. And then I tape it and I try to show him. It was just, I can't, there's no words. I mean, you and I know what we're talking about. It's very hard to describe to somebody who's not gone through this, just what a gut-wrenching experience this is. So I get out of this, and my youngest stops talking to me, just disappears. Uh-huh. I don't hear from him Mother's Day. He doesn't say anything on my birthday. He does show up, but stands way far in the corner on Christmas, doesn't personally interact with me. I know something's wrong. I know he's angry. I know he's hurt. We're all hurt. But we're not talking. And he and I had been pretty close, Yeah. So it stayed that way for a while. It just was this terrible distance, and I couldn't. And I, because of my training, I knew don't push, don't put him on the spot, let him work through this. Don't expect anything out of him. Don't guilt him. I knew all of that. Don't just leave him alone. Let him process this. So fast forward, several years pass. Actually, it's 5 years. I mean, and not all of it was that bad. There was just periods that really bad and periods that weren't that bad. But my oldest gets diagnosed with leukemia. Would you believe it? So, yeah. And they are roommates. The two of them are living together. And now my youngest is having to do what I did for my husband. He's having to like fill in all the same ways that I'm having to fill in, take over things that my oldest can't do, because my oldest had been functioning a lot for the two of them as roommates. So my youngest pulls me aside because I show up, I move into the area, become part of the care team. Every day I'm at the hospital. Thank God, by the way, my oldest is in remission, and we're 6 years out. We can say he's cured. But it was a terminal form. We didn't know if he'd make it. It really was a very scary time again. But my youngest pulled me aside and said, I need to apologize to you for something. And I said, no, you don't. I already knew what this is about. And he said, no, I do. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what you were going through, and now I do. And I said, listen, you lost a whole lot. What happened to Dad was terrible. It was just, and I disappeared. And I hate to tell you, if it happened again, I'd have to make the same decision, because there was only another way through this. But you really did lose. And I'm terribly sorry. You needed me and I couldn't be there. And he goes, but now I get it. And I goes, I appreciate you get it. We're very close now. But so that's an example of extenuating circumstance. It could be medical. It could be because work. It could be because of a move. I mean, there's lots of things that cause these types of disruptions. And kids don't always have the perspective to understand what's happening at a larger level, or to be empathic about that. All they know is how it impacts them.
I think that's a big situation. I think that's a running theme through a lot of these estrangements. Is these kids just, they thought they see it all and they thought they understood it all, and from their in their child's mind they did. Yeah. But you could not possibly not sitting in that, it's like walk in that person's shoes. You cannot, unless you're walking in your parents' shoes during that, you cannot possibly understand what it might have taken for that other person to get, the person through it, as well as the children through it, and come out the other side, and themselves too, somewhere along the way. So
right. Yeah. Do you ever watch the show, The Morning Show? It's on Apple TV. It's actually about it's
Jennifer Aniston, right?
Yeah. Jennifer Aniston's character has a really fascinating relationship with her daughter.
I've seen clips from it.
Where she's actually chewed her daughter out. Like, you cannot know what I have walked through and what I have done for you.
That was a great clip. Yeah, that was great, because that's so that's really real.
Yeah.
Like, that's really real.
Right. And it is hard for kids to know that we're adults, we're people too, with flaws and grievances and losses and tragedies ourselves, that we're suffering too. Yes, they're suffering. We're suffering. It's really hard. I think all humans have a hard time knowing how to hold space for each other in that kind of circumstance. But I think when no contact happens there, it's an example of the difficulty of holding space for each person.
Yeah, I think so too. And I agree with you that kids don't understand how to do that at that age.
You're right.
And frankly, you've most likely never been through something, you never, were ended up burying a husband. I was never prepared to bury a husband at such a young age. No one prepares you for going through that. And you can only do the best that you can through it, and then get through it. But you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
And there, you have to give yourself grace, but children, even so, it's hard for them to give you grace if they haven't walked and they're not prepared. They're too young to understand, and they're not prepared. And, when they get older, they still haven't walked in your shoes. So they don't see it. And that, you're right. I think it's that space, of giving grace that they're just not.
Right. I think it's important as a parent to give them grace. Yeah. It's not fair what's happening. It really is not fair. I'm not saying that, but to be able to realize you have to forgive yourself for doing the best that you can with the resources you had, but also forgiving the situation that they don't understand, and they lack the ability or the sophistication, the maturity to see your perspective. But because if you do that, then you are holding space for them in a way that maybe they didn't get earlier, but they're getting now. And it gives you an opportunity to rework. I mean, that's what I did, is that what bothers me is when I hear parents say, well, they're not talking to me. Should I still have them inherit? My thought was, well, they're still your kid. I mean, you're essentially saying, if you don't have the relationship with you that I like, then I'm not going to have a relationship back with you. And I'm going to show you that I'm going to punish you for failing to show up. And to me, that disturbs me. I feel like we need to continue to still say, we're connected, maybe not connected the way I like, but I still want to show you that I care and I see you. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of hard work, and it requires a lot of sacrifice on the injured party's side.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think we differ in our opinion on that for different reasons, but let's just get back to the original.
Well, we're not going to always align on everything, are we, though? Exactly.
No, it's okay. So then the last one is the married in.
Yeah, and then the last one is that we can have, I know, it is. It's a huge problem. It is shocking how often this happens. I hear about it all the time. We have great kids. They're doing really, I mean, my kids are not in a relationship. I worry about this one, honestly. And because, you can be fabulous people attract predatory people. Yes, that's the problem. They did a study, Sandra Brown.
You learned that firsthand, it seems.
I know. So, yeah. Yeah, 2014, Sandra Brown did a big, huge study out of Purdue University of 600 pathological love relationships. And she found that 2/3 of the population had no history of trauma and no history of a difficult childhood. But the reason they were attracted that toxic individual, that dangerous individual, was because they had 2 personality traits. They were highly agreeable and highly conscientious. Now, let's think about what that means. That's a person you and I would want to hire for a company. They're the perfect teammate. But what happens is predatory people recognizes those traits, those really wonderful personality traits, as long-suffering, as maybe a little gullible. They're people you can convince that they can change. They're willing to work hard at something. They follow the rules. They don't believe that you would do something that's not following the rules. In other words, they're easy to dupe, unfortunately. I hate to say that.
Right.
I score high on that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm sure he selected me. So here you have really great kids. And then because there's so many toxic individuals, I'm estimating, I think if you put all the personality traits together, it's roughly 1 in 5 people out there is not just not easy to be around. They're actually very, dysfunctional to be around. They're difficult to be around. 1 in 5, that's a lot.
Right.
So yeah, our kids could marry somebody. And then what happens? Well, they start to develop this connection, this bond, this trauma bond. And the person then starts to work really hard and do what they say, thinking we're going to make this relationship work. I want it to be good. And what is it? What is the first thing toxic individuals do? They cut off connections with other people because they want to isolate them in order to control them.
Yeah. And the new narrative that complements that today is that, we are, once you get married, we're the family, we're the family. And instead of understanding that, everybody recognizes you as the family, but you're a subset within a larger family too. It's not just one or the other. It's just, so there's that connection. And that with that comes, the support of that larger family. And that just, and that's, we're seeing so much fragmentation of large families and the support that really is required to raise, young people, and, grandkids, having relation with their grandparents and being able to pinch hit for mom and dad when you're capable of doing that or what have you. There's just so much out there right now that's just shredding. So to say, now that, today's family is just, we're the family. Since you married me, we're the family, and they're not our family anymore. I think that's very unhealthy. I think it's definitely, it makes for this alienation of, let's say, a son to his family, a daughter to his family, become that much more of an issue today, because you have those two forces. And once you have this toxic person per se, and then you have this, what I would consider really an unsupportive environment even to that subset of family. You know what I'm saying? Because we can't support them when we're outside looking in.
Well, yeah, then you don't really know what's happening on the inside. And on top of it, the person who has a cluster B personality type is going to have created a narrative that you are now not to be trusted, and that every action that you make has an ulterior motive. So they're going to start to sign you as the individual who is difficult, who's causing the problems, which is why they need the distance. But really what's happening is that person who has a personality traits or disorder is creating the alienation to increase the control. Because if you can cut off connection, then you can reduce the external reality. You can then control reality better.
Right. You know, you just reminded me of something too. One of the other aspects of, you know, being able to maintain a closeness with the larger family too, and especially the parents within and the future grandparents, is that when one side of the family may, you know, be going through something that causes disruption in the happy couple's life, so to speak, to be able to go to the other side of the family and have that other side like bring a sense of understanding to maybe what that other side is going through or what they're experiencing to that happy couple, it levels it out for the happy couple, because they're not going to realize what this, you know, mother, father are going through once they got, you know, maybe in a certain circumstance, mom is having a hard time processing, you know, letting go of her son, you know. Well, the other side of it is like, look, this is why this is happening. Do you see, you know, and you have to understand that you're losing all of that by pulling at the shredding that fabric, you know. And I think that's so.
But it's by design. That's the problem. It's not just even that these people are just not trusting people. You can say, oh, well, they've just had bad experiences before, or, you know, their parents are a little controlling. It's why they don't. No, this is by design. The design is to alienate those around them so that the person in the relationships is under greater control.
Right. So then let's talk about narcissism. What are, let's say, the top 3 or 4 characteristics of a narcissist? If I had to go and say, is this person a narcissist, or does this look like narcissism but isn't narcissism, or what is this? How would I qualify?
Yeah, the biggest trait is sort of this is superiority and entitlement. They see themselves as different and better than other people, as sort of outside of the rest of the world. So there's something about them essentially just different and better. But they also believe that because they're better, they deserve what they want when they want it. So there's this often a huge sense of this being privileged and entitled. But because of that, then you're going to see some the other characteristics to come up because of that. For example, they're jealous. They're extremely jealous of other people. And they also see themselves as the victim of life because they're superior. They should think they should get whatever they want. And life doesn't work that way. So when it doesn't, well, it's then something's unfair and wrong about that. So there's a profound level of jealousy. They also don't have good self-reflection. So they're not self-aware. And how you see that is that there's an inability to take on responsibility or accountability. Now, there are some, you know, I know Dr. Ramani is one of them who will say, well, that's because they're shame-based. I'm not convinced they're all shame-based. I'm not saying some may be, but being up close to one and getting to study him for 3 years, I didn't see I mean, when he got called out, he felt humiliated briefly. I mean, he didn't like it, but I didn't feel, because shame drives you to change your behavior. I mean, if something makes you feel truly uncomfortable and awful, you're not going to want to do that again. And these individuals do whatever they do it over and over and over, because they believe they're entitled to. They think, I mean, if they want to have an extra relationship, why should they not? Because, hey, they deserve it. They're special like that. Now, of course, that rule doesn't apply to you, but it does apply to them. So you'll see sort of this profound lack of self-awareness, but also a lack of empathy. They do not strive to have intimacy. Intimacy to them is dangerous. So they're not people. So they do what's more pseudo intimate. They can do a lot of really good behavior. But if you think about it, if you stand back, you'll see that behavior is more image management than actually true intimacy. They show up in the wonderful person because they want you to think well of them, not because they're truly invested in your well-being. There's a often deception, they all lie at some level or another, maybe in the sense that they're not being honest about their intentions, could be the lie, but there's also those that will outright are pathological liars. Depends on how severe the disorder is. And then often the disorder gets blended with the antisocial personality disorder. So you may see with some of them more callousness, law breaking individuals, they're ruthless. And they're just not terribly sensitive, emotional people. So that's narcissism. It's just an excessive. So best way to think of it, because I talked about how the brain's lit up different. So the areas of the brain that look different is the area that has to do with how we see ourselves in the center of the world. It's called mentation. It's excessively active. So they see the world from the grid of what's in this for me? How does this relate to me? How are people perceiving me? Excessively, more than you and I are doing that. We're all do it to some extent, but they're excessively doing it. It's always from their angle. Like what do I get out of this? How will this benefit me? And the other area that's underactive is the empathy. They cannot if you think about it, if you're excessively focused on yourself, you're not going to be caring about what it would be like to walk in your shoes. So there's a lack of empathy or a sensitivity to how others do. And then they are also often struggle with impulse control, which is they believe they deserve what they want when they want it. And they often will then go ahead and do those things. So you'll see sort of this problem with that. And there's often a lot of dysregulated emotions. So when they feel something, they feel it intensely. And they tend to like they hold grudges, and they're often retaliatory because you hurt them, and they don't know how to soothe themselves and be mature around their emotions. So they tend to get even more often. So that's sort of kind of in a nutshell what narcissism looks like.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot to identify. Do they intentionally, well, let me ask a question. Is part of the disorder intentionally hurting somebody? Like, do they intentionally go to hurt somebody just to like maybe even back away from them? You know what I understand what I'm saying?
You asking, yeah, that's a frequent question. A lot of survivors want to know, like, do they know that they're doing it, or did they just accidentally do this? I think there's okay. So this is what Dr. Ramani points out. I agree with her. It seems unintentional, but here's the thing: they don't do it in the wrong places.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Right. That's
so that means there's some control. There's a measure of control. I think it goes back to their entitlement. They would say, well, I didn't mean or realize I was doing it, but they're doing it with you. They may not do it in front of the boss, but they'll do it with you. The reason is because with the boss, they're trying to protect their image. So they don't want the boss to think poorly of them. But on the other hand, they don't think well of you. You're an object. You're not. I think that's the other essential thing about narcissism that I didn't mention is that because of all of these problems, interpersonal problems, they then don't recognize other people as people. If you think of your mental space, say, for example, you're in a room, psychological room in your mind. And normally healthy people in that room have a lot of their most important relationships occupy that space. Not only are you in that room, but everybody that you love is in that room with you. And you're trying to manage the needs of everybody against the needs of yourself. That's what it looks like for most of us. I think for a narcissist, the person in the room is them. That's it. I think, and then if we are in the room, we're in the room as tools hanging off their tool belt, but we're not really people. And their question is not how do you balance the needs of others with their needs? It's how do I use others in order to benefit me? I think is how they would see the world.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Now, it makes me think of a couple of things. I'm reflecting back on the story you told about wolves and sheep. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, being the tools on the tool belt. Well, I share that story. Share that story and how.
Well, I think of what I said exactly.
Where the wolves, feel like they deserve to eat whatever they want to eat.
Yeah.
And
so you're trying to how do I blend those metaphors? Here's how I blend that. So I said we're tools on a tool belt. Okay, so if we're wolves and sheep, then what the wolves would see is the sheep are consumables. So narcissists would see that it's another way. The tool in the tool belt is you're useful, but sheep you're consumable. And I think they do both. I think they're
I
doing
think
both.
they definitely consume. But then what happens, we have a world where, runs on that, where there are wolves and there are sheep, right? So, but what happens is what I'm seeing in my group and what have you, is when finally, in the case of parent-child, when a parent finally says, look, I'm done being the tool for you. I'm done. This is the boundary. I've had it. And that boundary comes down. That's when the estrangement happens.
Yep.
And on top of it, that's when a smear campaign will happen.
Actually, it's always been happening. You just didn't know it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about more of that. But also, I look at it, I say, in this world of wolves and sheep, where there's a lot of that semantic abuse going on. I mean, within the household, where the semantics, I see it in high school. I've seen it, and I've experienced it. Myself, when my children were going there, that all of a sudden they turn the semantics around, and they use it as if you end up thinking stuff. But I didn't say any of that. I did. Right. It's like all of a sudden I didn't. But that's not at all what I said. All what I meant. But in this world of wolves and sheep, I look at things and I say, this is being adopted as a behavior. And they're being taught this in some way, shape, or form. Because this isn't just all of a sudden just more. How many kids, how many parents do I talk to say this is happening in my home, where it's not even just like, it's not the normal teenage independent, I'm ready to go tackle the world. This is, I hate to say it, but a more insidious type of I go back to the word of shredding.
Yeah. But if you have the same world view, like, let's use another analogy to sort of help drive this home. If you and I really believe the world's flat, then we're going to talk about everything related to a flat world perspective, like how we travel and where other people live. We would view it in a certain way that would sound very similar to each other because we're working from the same frame. That's what's happening with these individuals, is that because they have this world at war mindset, the best way I can think of trying to get inside of it to imagine it is it's a tug of war, sort of like what you saw on that Korean show. Yeah, I'm trying to think of that. I don't know if you watched that.
Yeah.
Red light, green light, kind of. That,
yeah,
remember?
Yeah.
Where they pulled them off into death. You went off the cliff.
What is that show? It's
wild.
So
it is wild. So it's that kind of tug of war. The loser, to them, to lose is to be annihilated, is death.
Squid Games.
Squid Games. So they're going to do whatever they have. So let me define semantic abuse. By the way, it's a term I coined talking to ChatGPT about one of my difficult relationships. And then it and I together, like, oh, there's this like linguistic manipulation that's going on that's different than circular arguments, which is a whole nother thing that narcissists do. Or narcissistic word salad is another thing that they typically do. What it is it's a distortion of words and meanings in order to rewrite the narrative in that other person's favor, in order to conceal a truth or a wrongdoing by the twisting of the language, which protects their control of the circumstances, but also helps them avoid accountability. And it destabilizes the listener's internal reality, making that person who's being discussing it question their own memory, judgment, and perception. So you may say, I gave the analogy of we decided that we're not going to look at each other's Instagram. We decided we're not going to talk to other people on Instagram, and you find out your partner did. And then it would say, no, we decided that we weren't going to look at each other's Instagram. We're like, no, that's not what we talked about. What are you talking about? But they've changed the narrative, moved the goalpost. And now you're the offender because you brought something up because they violated an original contract or an agreement you two had.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's it.
Yeah. It's very maddening because then you become arguing over what you agreed on, and you lose the track of the fact but you violated the agreement, and I feel betrayed over that violation.
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't stop moving. That's the thing, it's
no, it never. No, because here's the thing: we get confused. It looks like they want resolution. No, they don't want resolution. That's not the goal. The goal is to keep you destabilized and for them to stay in control.
Right. And that's why so many parents are saying, look, they go and they apologize for whatever they're told they've done. Right. And then 2 seconds later, the child goes off and is like estranged again because now it's the new version of that I'm just like,
yeah, like you didn't apologize right, or you didn't accountability for the things you should have. It was for the wrong things, or yeah,
or
I
you
know.
forgot this little like
I know.
period on it, and you didn't apologize for that too. And it becomes like so frustrating to parents.
You
And
lose.
like,
They
I just
perpetually
can't
put
keep
you in a
up with
lose
all this, and they
position.
get frustrated out of it.
Yeah.
Right. So then as we wrap this up, and I'm going to have you back on because there's more to talk about. How do these parents who are dealing with these situations where the child is a narcissist or is a narcissist and has gone estranged or has some sort of personality disorder that's leading to the estrangement, so many of these parents go through a period of saying, I can't go on, I can't move on, I can't get over, or I can't. I mean, I think, what is it, 33% have thought about suicide, and plenty more have actually attempted it in this country. Now we look at Australia, which has numbers are higher. And what do we say to these people? How do we encourage them to say, yes, you can move on. You moved on, all right, in your own way out of the relationship. You've also moved on in your own way in your parenting, your parent-child relationship with your mother. How do you give them encouragement and hope and a goal to look towards? I had that question right this morning from someone, like, I can't go on. Like, what do I do? How do I move on?
There is an intense level of grief, and those of us who've experienced, like you and I, losing a partner, know what that grief. And I didn't want to move on, and the idea of one of my children dying, I mean, because that's essentially what happens, like a death of a relationship. It does feel like it's annihilating. I can understand the desire not to want to live. I get that. What I would urge them to consider, though, is life is constantly changing. You don't really know what the future is going to hold. And we don't know what kind of healing may or may not happen in this person's life, where there might be someday circling back of some kind, or maybe a future generation circling back. You don't know that. But what you can do is really focus on yourself. And I know that, so my advice is a hard advice. It's sort of not, there's not a sweet answer. I wish I could just tell you, wave a wand and sort of fix this, but I can't. But what I can tell you to do the hard work of grieving this. This is a death of a serious form of a death. I have somebody dear to me right now who's going through this exactly right now. And this person is actively hurting. So allow yourself the space to grieve, and then begin to make a relationship for other types. Begin to ask for other people to kind of come into your life, and like ask the universe, ask God, open yourself up to the possibility to find other relationships that can step in and maybe meet those needs in a new way. I know it's not the same. I know that. So there are losses in my life that I realize that, yes, I can find substitutes, but it doesn't make up for the original loss. They are still a loss, but have the grace and the patience with yourself to hurt, but also know that this is not the end of the story, and to be open to what might come down the road in other ways. I often say, family is the friends you choose.
Right.
So, we can make new families, and I think we need to expand the definition of family, make it broader, bigger. Maybe it's those. I know, for example, there's somebody that I know in Mexico who's a single woman, no kids, and she's adopted. She lives, like I said, lives in Mexico. She's adopted her neighbors. She's very invested in those children's lives. She helps them out, helps make sure they go to school and make sure that they get their needs met. And I know recently she's gone through a terrible physical illness, and I think they've really stepped up and helped her. There's been this reciprocity in this very special, unique relationship.
Yeah. I think part of that also, too, is I think parents need to realize that as their children grow and they go on and they make their own lives, their own families, there's going to be less of not so much of an overall love for your child connection and spending time, but that time spent will be less no matter what, right? And I think that you have to at some point accept that you're not as pivotal in their lives anymore as you were when, the day you gave birth and in through childhood and whatnot. At some point, no matter what, that letting go was going to happen. And you would have to face yourself.
Exactly. You're really touching on something important. You're talking about idealization is really what you're
Right.
talking about. And we do that. We have this sort of picturesque, think about Christmas. We have this image of Christmas that we want to have. And then there's what really happens on Christmas, and
Right.
often the two don't match. And the
Right.
same goes with these relationships is that you may have had this picture, what you thought your future was going to look like with this child when they became an adult. But then there's really what is, and it never matches. There's always
Yeah.
a miss. But part of one of the things I have learned that death has taught me, losing my late husband has taught me, is that learn to embrace what is. Learn to embrace the present moment. Make the best of this. This is all you're going to get ever, is this moment.
Right.
Learn to really step into it and enjoy the beauty of this moment. Yes, it may not have all the parts and pieces that you want, but it also has things you may not be seeing that are very lovely. So learn
Right.
to sort of really experience the present moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Learn to pivot in
Yeah,
many ways.
exactly. I love that.
Learn to
That's a
pivot.
great, yeah.
So, well, it was a pleasure having you on, Dr. Kerry. It really is. I'm having you back.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
This was a great conversation, a lot of fun. And it's
Yeah.
very nice meeting you. Yeah, very nice meeting you.
It's very nice meeting you too. I'm glad I got a chance to come across your videos and your work, and you're really helping a lot of people. And I'm sure you're going to continue to. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
all right. Well, see you soon, and
Okay.
have a great rest of your day. Okay. And
Thank
thanks for
you so
coming on.
much. Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So there you have it. She's a great lady, isn't she? And her videos, there's not one video that she puts out that doesn't help. So I would check her out. I'm going to put the link to her work below and her videos, and please go and watch them. Okay, they're like I said, they're incredible. That's it. I'm going to wrap up. Before I do, once again, I'm going to share the book Doormat Mom No More. Please go and get the book. It really does help, and put a lot of hard work into it. And you will also learn my story, because I write at least some of my story in there. But it's something that you will definitely help you get through estrangement and go on with your life. So that's it. I look forward to seeing you again on the next Doormat Mom No More podcast episode. In the meantime, stay well.